out today Jan Phillips. She is no stranger to our community, and we're certainly grateful that she's speaking to us this morning. So Jan's talk will be titled Beyond Belief, Becoming the Mystics and Prophets We Came Here to Be. And a little bit about Jan's bio here is Jan is a thought leader who connects the dots between spiritual intelligence, evolutionary creativity, and social transformation. She is the author of 11 award-winning books, and she's taught in over 25 countries and has published works in the New York Times, MS Newsday, People, Parade Magazine, and even more. So Jan teaches throughout the United States and Canada, facilitating retreats on evolutionary faith and prophetic action. So with that being said, Jan, welcome this morning, and the floor is yours.
Okay, and let me just say that MS thing is Ms. Magazine.
Okay, all right. I was wondering about that.
I saw you were wondering about it. All right, so this is remedial work. Everybody already knows everything I'm about to say, but it's just sometimes we need to hear it in a slightly different way. That's why that morning music was the same sentence over and over again, because we just need to have it repeated to something about human nature. And since COVID, all of us were changed pretty dramatically by that event. And so now we're kind of reassessing, who am I now in the face of it, right? I find that I'm much more contemplative. I had some resistance to that isolation at first, but now I'm way more of a hermit than I used to be. So for today, I'm going to break it up into 3 chunks, because 3 chunks we can remember. And I'm going to talk about things as if we're looking through A, a telescope, B, binoculars, and C, a microscope. And in these evolutionary times, we know there's another beautiful telescope out there besides the James Webb one, the Hubble one we've had forever. Now we have the James Webb telescope, and it's really sending us information to beat the band, just a beautiful instrument. But when we think cosmically, like what in the hell is going on and where do I fit in it? All we need to do is remember that there's a miraculous, majestic, cosmic event unfolding. We know the universe is still expanding. We don't know what's behind it. We don't know what's behind the Big Bang. And we don't need to know that. We'll find it out, I guess, when we die. But we can know that we're part of it, that this teeny tiny planet Earth is like a dust speck among all the trillions of galaxies, but we're tremendous meaning makers. And so if you have paid any attention to the works of the mystics, Teilhard de Chardin is one of our greatest. He was a Catholic Jesuit paleontologist mystic who was writing constantly all the time because he was so astonished by what was being revealed to him. But the Catholic Church, as we know, if any of you have ever been involved, wants to keep us in a tight little container. So they wouldn't publish any of his work, but it got out after he died. And one of the most brilliant things that he described to us is that the whole cosmic thing he called it a cosmogenesis. It's evolution continuing to unfold, and the part that we play in it. There's a twofold event. One is the materialization of the divine. Divinity is turning itself into matter. That would be us. Because we know there's only energy, and energy takes one of two forms. It's either a wave form, which is invisible, or a particle form, which is visible. So we are mostly particle, but we have waves inside us. Like, where's the divine in our lives? It's in the air we breathe. It's in the air in our lungs. We're in constant interaction with divinity. So the materialization of the divine is the half of it. The other half is what we're doing, which is the divinization of matter. So we complete the circle. We are responsible for the divinization of matter. And what's mystical about that is that we understand. I'm looking at the earth, the greens, the trees, the plants, the flowers. I understand all of that. I see that as sacred. I see this earth as a sacred earth. And so my work as a prophetic being is to call attention to that, to divinize it. What does it mean to divinize matter? It's what we do in our rituals and ceremonies. This weekend, I went up to Big Bear Mountain where there was this ceremony. It's a 4-day ceremony of elders from, it was about 35 elders up there. And there's a lot from Brazil, Peru, Mexico, Guatemala, all tribals, elders from probably 10 or 12 tribes in this country, just in a big circle. And there was an opening ceremony where all the elders sat there. And at one point, some of them sang their songs individually. Some of them did their dances, so we could see the Apache dance, this dance, that dance. But at one point, they were all invited to stand up and bestow a blessing in their own way. And so the Navajos did it a certain way, but it was just, must have been like Pentecost, right? When all the voices were sounding out, but somehow miraculously one could understand what was going on. I just cried through the whole thing. There's like 35 elders, and they're singing and chanting and waving their eagle feathers and bowing. And that to me was a real live embodiment of the divinization of matter. The most prophetic among us are those who remind who's ever in their midst that this is a glorious thing we're involved. This is a beautiful day. You know, we're like flowers in the garden. We wake up, we shine, we're the light of the world. We're divinizing matter. So that's it from a telescopic viewpoint. From a binocular viewpoint, and we look out upon the earth, we look at our life, and how are we syncing up? How are we aligning with the forces, with the north, the south, the east, the west, with fire, water, earth, air? How are we mindfully being in alignment with these elements? How are we having our experiences? To what extent are we training our mind to understand that we are here to have experience? Our souls took on these bodies in order to evolve the whole shebang. And how our bodies evolve it entails the use of our brains, because we only learn from our mistakes. I, I don't really learn from other people's mistakes. So I make a lot of them. So how come I'm so smart? That's why I'm giving the homily today, because I have made so many mistakes. And what happens is, it's like Joseph Campbell used to talk about it, like he called it the hero's journey. And it's what happens to all of us. We start out, we have a mission, we enter the forest, and we're going to get to the other side after we've accomplished our mission. But we get in the forest, and suddenly the demons come out from behind the trees, and we have to put our dukes up and battle and stay alive and defend our beliefs, our stories, our truths, whatever we consider important to who we are. We have to defend that and stay alive and complete our mission. It's called a narrative arc in literature. Start out, you get this far through the woods in the conflict, and there's no lesson, there's no learning, there's no wisdom without a conflict. I was in an audience once listening to Joyce Carol Oates, who's written more novels than I can even imagine. She's this frail little elder. She's all dressed in black. She's all hunched over. She got little black sneakers, black stockings. She's on the stage being interviewed, and she just stops everything and she looks out at the audience and she says, "Three kind people does not a play make." I'm going, what? Three kind people does not a play make. And what she's saying to us is, nothing happens when there's three kind people. There has to be some drama. That's why Shakespeare's a master. Shakespeare knew it. Even comedy's got some kind of conflict and drama. It's where our attention goes, because that's what has to happen before the denouement, before the resolution. So what we're training our mind for is to be prepared when those conflicts come, and to shorten the time between when we're singing our country western tune, "They Done Me Wrong," and when we get to say that was the best thing that ever happened. And we'll just take divorce, for example, because so many people have experienced it. If they ever let gays married, I'd have had 5 divorces, I'll tell you that. But it's a situation where you enter into something and then change occurs, and that relationship needs to shape shift for both parties to go on for further evolution. So there's a dissolution of the relationship. And when that happens at first, it feels like the worst thing that ever happened, because we all hate that. It was like me the night I got kicked out of the convent for being gay. Worst thing that ever happened in my life. Worst thing than been being beat up in an alleyway. Worse than being raped. Worse than having a gun pointed to my head. I've had many experiences that were pretty grim, but being kicked out of the convent, worst ever. And it took me 20 years to stop having it be my country western tune. And I was consciously working on it, doing a lot of therapy, trying to get over it. But I had so much grief, so much shame, so much rage. Just the emotions were so huge, and talk therapy never helped. And in my 20th year, I finally went and talked to the woman who was the head honcho. the provincial director of my religious community when it happened. And I said, could I just tell you the story of my trajectory since the day I decided to be a nun? I only decided to be a nun because at age 12, I was suicidal, and a nun basically saved my life. And when that happened, I'm 12, and I said, how does a 12-year-old calculate things? Well, a nun saved my life. So if I become a nun, I could save other kids' lives, right? Because it was a terrible thing to realize you're homosexual at age 12, just when puberty's setting in. So the nun saved my life. So anyway, the superior, the head honcho, 20 years after it happened, it happened in 69, and this is around 1990, we sat down. She says, yeah, tell me the story. I said, I'm going to start when I'm 12, and I'm going to end up with right today, us sitting here. So I told her the whole story. And at the end, she said, sister, will you forgive me for this terrible injustice that was done to you on my watch? And I wasn't anticipating that. I was kind of surprised, taken aback by it. But I said, sure, I forgive you for this terrible injustice that was done to me on your watch. And then she said, will you forgive the entire community of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet for this terrible injustice that was done to you by us? I said, yeah, it didn't cost me anything, right? I wasn't holding back. I'm like glad to let it go. Sure, I forgive you. I forgive the whole community. One fell swoop, cost me nothing. And anyway, after that happened, some super moment occurred. It's like when the light breaks through the clouds and all those rays come down, and this huge burden was lifted up off me. And I saw the whole thing from a completely different perspective. I think that's called grace. And I said to her, oh my God, as horrific as it was, what I see now is that you all gave me the opportunity to have 2 years of a monastic life. I have gratitude. I'm grateful for that. And it was like, both of us just sat there going, holy cow, what this girl walked in the door full of lamentations and grief, and now she's saying, thank you for the thing. That's the grace that may be somehow attached to forgiveness. I don't know what it's attached to. I only know that it liberated me from my sad story. And driving home from that event, I had another insight, which was I could see, it ran like a movie through my head, and I glimpsed every occasion where I made moves that would lead to me getting dismissed. I wasn't a good novice, right? I smoked cigarettes. I stole wine from the priest's freezer. I stole food from the priest's domain. I talked during grand silence. I kissed 2 novices. I got myself kicked out. So I realized then that I'm responsible for the whole shebang. I made it happen because somewhere deep inside me, I knew I had a bigger life to have than that of a monastic. So I'm telling you all this to say, at first, it feels like it's happening to us, which is true. It's happening to us. But as we evolve, progress, and process the tragedies of our lives, we can understand, oh my God, It happened through me. I'm a co-creator. And it finally, we get to say, it happened for me. It happened for me. So I could sit here today and have a story that has some value attached to it. Because now you can think of the tragedies of your life. You can imagine, what did you have to do with it? And how did it benefit you after all? So that's us looking through binoculars at our earthly experience. And then when we look microscopically into our own interior life, we see that it's in our hands how powerful the relationship is that we create with mind at large. You know, Emily Dickinson has a line. She says, "The only news I get is bulletins all day from immortality." Anybody who's on my mailing list, which I would hope you all are, it's a very smart thing to be on. You can get on there on my website, janphillips.com. Every Sunday morning, I send out a little note, it's called Bulletins from Immortality. And this morning's bulletin, usually it's poetry, a couple cartoons, whatever, but this morning was a little story about something that happened to me this week. You know, my spiritual practice is the time I devote to my love affair with divinity. It's pretty ridiculous to say you're having a relationship with the sacred one, with the great beloved, but you don't have time. You don't have time for a spiritual practice. That is so crazy. When you fall in love, you make time to make love, right? When you're in love with somebody, you make time for communion, for all that goes on around the beginning of a relationship. Think of that when you tell me you don't have time for spiritual practice. So anyway, the enlightened moment came. It was so weird because I spent about an hour. In the first 15 minutes is I say some old-fashioned Catholic prayer. I say two old-fashioned Catholic prayers. One of them was the morning offering that we said as Catholic students in a Catholic school every morning. Oh, Jesus, to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, blah, blah, blah. Well, so I have to seriously rework the words in an old prayer. So I'm not saying I stand here sinful and sorrowful. So I've reworked and rephrased all these prayers so they're palatable to me. But at the end of the morning offering, it says, and I pray for the intentions of everyone for whom I've promised to pray. And I'm big into mnemonic devices. So how do you remember things? And so my strategy to remember all the people for whom I promised to pray is I do it alphabetically. And so it just goes I have these two plants, Aphrodite and Eros, that I pray for, and Annie, my partner who died, and B is Barbara and Shelley, and Bill and Suzanne, and C is Cheryl, Carol, Sherry, and blah, 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 blah. So I get down to G, and the only word for G I have is Gaia, which is Mother Earth. So I got 5 names for, F, 5 names for H, but G is always only Gaia, because that's a pretty massive thing. But what I noticed when I started to say Gaia was something happened in my body, and it was the weirdest thing. Nothing happens when I say any of the other names. But when I say Gaia, and I'm just sitting in my bed and I'm staring at 2 candles on my altar, but I feel flush in my body. And it's like somebody has just injected warm, healing fluid. Joyful. It feels like my cells go like that. Joyful. And it's a visceral kind of physiological experience. And I'm just going, every time I get to G and say Gaia or Gaia, however people pronounce that, that happens to me. It doesn't take long because I move right into my H's and the rest, but it happens since the day I instituted the alphabet as my mnemonic device. It's been going on for months, and I used to it, and I like saying it. So I go, can't wait to get to G because I'll have that good, warm, fuzzy feeling. And the other day, like 3 days ago, it occurred to me. What happens is I'm praying for Gaia, and I am that. I am a part of Gaia. As much as a redwood, as much as the ocean, as much as the earthworm, I am a part of Gaia. And prayer is non-local. It happens immediately. So I didn't say I pray for Jan. I said I pray for Gaia, but I get all the benefit, and so I now know my prayer works because I feel it in every cell, like my DNA is unwinding, relaxing, causing me to feel rapturous. So that's looking at it interiorly. And I tell you that story. If you've fallen away from your spiritual practice, that's my encouragement to get back to it. Commit, even if you commit 10 minutes. When I started, I was in a SNID. My spiritual teacher said to me, you can have an ordinary life if you want to be ordinary and not have a spiritual practice. But if you really want to be the great one you came here to be, you have to have a spiritual practice. And I said, oh, crap. I'm so busy. I'm in graduate school. I don't want to, how am I going to make she just hung up the phone and said, if you get it together, call me back. And if you don't, I don't need to talk to you anymore. So I decided on 20 minutes. That would be it. And the practice was light a candle at the end of my bed. Don't expose myself to any media. That was 1992, way before cell phones. So just don't have the phone nearby, no newspapers, no TV on, no nothing. Just 20 minutes, look at the candle, be quiet, imagine yourself a satellite dish to supreme intelligence. And then I started getting communicated to, because when all your attention is on that thing speaks pretty loudly. So now, of course, 20 minutes is way too short. So I set my alarm for 6 today so I could have an hour before I had you to have my joy and my bliss. So I work with people who have like ADHD, OCD, and they say, I can't possibly do it. And I say, just do 5 minutes, 5 minutes every day. Make a sacred place in your house, pick out a time, do it every day, 5 minutes. I had a woman who never thought it could happen. And after we were together, after about 2 months, she texts me and it says, I'm up to 2 minutes. And it was a huge success. It doesn't matter, 2 minutes, but it means your commitment. It means that your commitment is alive and well. And I'm sure it will grow, because when we commit, as W.S. Murray, the great Scottish Himalayan expedition leader, wrote in a thing about commitment, when you really commit, then providence moves too. So it's not just us, right? There's great invisible forces pulling us toward it, pushing us from behind, but we don't get the benefit of that as much as we do when we're in a loving, real, honorable relationship with those forces. So that's your morning prayer from me. Amen.